is now being recorded.
Hello, and welcome to a training for grantees of the Enhanced Training and Services to End Violence and Abuse of Women Later in Life program, also known as the ALL or the Elder Abuse Grant Program. Today we will be going over the reporting form that grantees must fill out every 6 months. The 2 reporting periods cover from January to June and from July to December each year. The January to June report is due on July 30th, and the July to December report is due on January 30th of the following year. We hope that this training enables you to provide the most detailed and accurate reporting of your grant-funded work. Accurate data reporting on your semi-annual progress report is important for many reasons. Your quantitative and qualitative data enable VAWA's effectiveness to be measured. VAWA MEI creates reports for OVW using your data and data from grantees across the country. These summary data reports support OVW to make requests for increased appropriations and to defend VAWA funding to decision makers. Your data also helps OVW to make sure federal funds are being spent appropriately and to measure the performance of grant programs. Additionally, every 2 years the Attorney General is required to submit a report to Congress on the overall effectiveness of VAWA funding. VAWA grantee data makes up a significant part of that mandated report. The more consistently grantees fill out their reports, the more accurately VAWA's effectiveness can be measured through these means. Before we get started looking at the progress reporting form page by page, we have a couple general tips for successful data reporting. Please read the separate instructions. There are many helpful examples to assist you in filling out the reporting form. Throughout the form, there are other categories listed for many questions. In general, we ask that you use the other category only if you can't find a way to put the information into an existing category. When we aggregate data for reports, often responses in the other category will not get included in the reports. There are a few cases where other really is the only option to accurately capture what you are reporting, which is fine. However, we simply ask that you take the time to rule out all other options before using the other category. Additionally, if you do not have an other to report, leave the description box blank. Please do not report NA, not yet, no, none, etc. Following most sections of the form, you will find optional narrative questions. Use these narrative questions to talk about the unique successes of your grant-funded activities. Talk about the impact grant-funded activities has made on your community or for survivors. These questions exist at the end of each section so that you can provide more detail about the work being done in each area that the quantitative hard data does not capture on its own. We encourage you to report in the optional narrative questions to help your program most accurately capture the work you are doing with grant funds. We ask that you try not to use acronyms or abbreviations in your data. If you do use an acronym, please provide an explanation in each question where you do use that acronym. Finally, do not send attachments or extra documents combining data that is asked for in the report. Only data that is contained in the reporting form itself will be received and analyzed by Muskie's VAWA team. And if you ever have any questions, please give us a call or send us an email. We are here to help you and will happily work through any scenarios or questions you might have about your report. Now, for the reporting form. The first section, Section A1, is about general grant information. This section asks for things like the date of report and the point of contact information. Point of contact is particularly important because this is the person that VAWA MEI will be getting in touch with if we have questions about your data or need to follow up. All grantees must fill out Section A1 grant information. Questions 2 through 4 are pre-populated by the GMS system, but we encourage you to look at these closely to ensure that the information is accurate. That is, the current reporting period, your grantee name, and your grant number. The next section in the report, Section A2, covers staff information. We're going to go through this section first by looking at tips for staff and then by filling out an example staff section. So, when you're considering reporting staff, only report FTEs, which we call full-time equivalents, for staff whose salary is provided fully or partially by grant funds. This would include contracted work paid by the grant. Report by activity performed rather than by job title. If staff members fall into two or more categories, divide FTEs among the applicable categories. Staff time should be prorated if necessary. For example, when someone is part-time, was hired partway through the grant period, is a contractor, or is full-time but only partially funded by ALL program funds. Finally, report to the second decimal, i.e. 1.25 FTEs. Now, we will get into what FTEs signify and how to calculate them. The FTE calculation is based on 40 hours per week for 26 weeks or 1,040 working hours in a 6-month reporting period baseline. That is, 1.0 FTEs is equivalent to a person's time of 40 hours a week worked throughout the whole reporting period, or a total of 1,040 hours worked over a period of 6 months. Just as 0.10 FTEs is equivalent to 4 hours a week, or a total of 104 hours worked over the entire 6-month reporting period. Here is a cheat sheet which allows you to simply take the total number of hours worked in a particular category and divide it by 1,040, the total number of hours in the 6-month reporting period, to get your appropriate FTE. And again, remember to round to the second decimal. Now, for our example, your grant funds, in our example, are used to fund one full-time administrative assistant whose salary is 30% funded by the grant, and another support staff whose salary is 15% funded by the grant. In this case, you would report only the percent of salary that is grant funded. The correct FTE under support staff would therefore be 0.45 support staff FTEs, which is 30% plus 15%. As you can see, on the support staff line, we have filled out 0.45 FTEs. For another example, if your grant funds a full-time employee who spent 24 hours a week coordinating the program and 16 hours a week training professionals in the field, you would divide staff time by those two functions. So the correct FTE under a program coordinator would be 0.60 FTEs for 24 hours out of a 40-hour working week, and 0.40 FTEs under educator trainer for 16 hours of each 40-hour working week. So as you can see in the staff section in our example GMS form, program coordinator has 0.60 FTEs and trainer has 0.40 FTEs reported. This brings the total FTEs in our example to 1.45. Now for our next section, Section B, purpose areas. Section B is asking you to choose all statutory purpose areas that apply for your grant. All purpose areas for which you have grant-funded activities during the current reporting period should be checked off. If you're not sure which purpose areas apply to your grant program, you should refer to your grant proposal. If some of your purpose areas changed, you can check them in this question, but keep in mind that your program specialist must approve all changes to your purpose areas. As you can see here, in our example, we've checked off training programs, victim services, and conducting cross-training for victim service organizations and other community groups. Now, on to one of the more weighty sections on the ALL form, the training section, Section C1. Training is defined as activities provided for professionals or volunteers acting in the role of professional to improve their response to victim survivors as it relates to their role in the system. That is, if grant funds directly supported the training of non-grant funded people who are professionals or volunteers acting in the role of a professional, you will fill out the training section. Do not count staff development of grant-funded staff in this section. And do not count general community education in this section. That is, education events provided to people who are members of the general community and not members of the response to victims in a professional capacity. So when you are thinking about whether or not to count an activity as training, think about your audience. If you are presenting to a group that is typically not seen as professionals that work with victim survivors or offenders, you should question whether you are providing training or rather you are doing community education. Now we're going to go through an extensive training example, since this is, after all, a training-focused grant. In our example, you used grant funds to send a multidisciplinary training team of 5 people to the mandatory 4-day Training of Trainers event sponsored by OVW. This activity is reported in question 11. Question 11 is specifically asking for the number of people who were trained at the national training event sponsored by OVW, which is always held between January and June. A maximum of 7 individuals might attend this mandatory training, so the total for this question should not be more than 7. And do report individuals according to the type of agency they work at. For the July to December reporting period, grantees should not have any data to report in question 11. So as you can see, in question 11 in our example, we filled out 2 people who were sent to this mandatory Training of Trainers event from elder services agencies, 2 people who were sent from law enforcement agencies, and 1 person who was sent from a victim services organization, for a total of 5. Continuing with our example, grant-funded staff at your organization also provided 1 mandatory full-day training for local law enforcement, which is reported in question 12. 1 mandatory law enforcement training events provided. Question 13 is asking about the number of people who were trained in the mandatory and advanced law enforcement training events, where, in our example, 20 law enforcement officers and 2 detectives attended this mandatory training event provided for law enforcement officers and detectives. Note, report people trained in this 2 full-day training events column in question 13, as the grant requirement has changed from the original 2 half-day event programming to 1 full-day event since the reporting form was created. So, in our example, grant-funded staff provided 1 mandatory full-day training, and those 20 law enforcement officers and 2 detectives are reported in the 2 full-day training events column. If grantees used their funds to bring national experts to their communities to provide advanced training for detectives and investigators, report the total number of advanced law enforcement training events provided to law enforcement officers and detectives and investigators. We did not include this in our example, but it is part of the same question, question 13. In the next portion of our example, we are going to look at questions 14 and 15. Questions 14 and 15 are blank in our example, but I'm going to talk about them briefly. Question 14 specifically refers to a 2.5-day National Prosecutors Workshop on Elder Abuse sponsored by OVW. Report the total number of prosecutors who attended this OVW-sponsored training event. Question 15 is asking about the total number of judges who attended a 4-day National Judicial Institute on Elder Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation sponsored by OVW. Now, back to our example. Question 16 is asking specifically about a national-level training event sponsored by OVW. A maximum of 5 individuals might attend this event, so the total people trained in the mandatory direct services Training of Trainers event, question 16, should never be more than 5. Question 17 asks about mandatory local 2-day direct services training events. Finally, questions 18 and 19 ask about a requirement of every grant. Each grantee must bring a national expert to their community to conduct 1 cross-training event for victim services organizations, governmental agencies, the courts, law enforcement agencies, and nonprofit, non-governmental organizations working with older victims. The purpose of these required cross-training events is to help each discipline better understand the role they play in addressing elder abuse in their community. It's usually held at the beginning of a given grant and is often referred to as a kickoff event. If this particular cross-training event occurred during the current reporting period, report 1 in question 18 and the people who attended in question 19. In our example, grant funds were used to send representatives from 2 different MOU partners, 1 person from the Victim Services Program and 2 people from the Elder Services Agency, to a national level mandatory training of trainers event provided by OVW. These 3 people sent to this event are reported in question 16. In our example, these 3 individuals came back and then provided a mandatory local training to the local prosecutor's office and other victim services organization staff in your area, which is reported in question 17. This reporting period, your team also held the grant's required cross-training event. The cross-training event was attended by a wide variety of people serving older victim survivors in your community, including the courts, elder services agencies, and adult protective services. As you can see, reported as 1 event in question 18 and 11 total people trained at this event in question 19. Moving on to section C2, Coordinated Community Response. This next section on the form is required, and all grantees should complete this subsection. This section provides a picture of the relationships you have with other agencies and organizations in your community. Simply go through the list of partners and check all boxes that apply. As you can see, there are different columns for on-site consultations, invitational meetings, planning, development, implementation of training, and partnership, team building, and cross-training, as well as a separate column for any agencies and organizations who are MOU partners on your grant. In section C3, policies, you would fill this section out if any protocols or policies were developed, substantially revised, or implemented during the current reporting period. If the policy or protocol is still in the development or revision phase, you should not report the policy protocol implemented until the period when it is actually finished. Just to clarify, by substantially revised, we mean that a good amount of time was spent revising the policy protocol. Simply adding the name of another group under your underserved populations policy would not constitute as a revision. But if separate protocols around how to serve the new group were included, this addition would count as a revision, and you would fill out the policies section. In our example, we've checked off that mandatory training standards for staff and volunteers was a policy substantially developed or revised or implemented during the current reporting period. The next section is section C4, products. You would fill out the product section if products were developed or revised during the current reporting period. You would enter the number developed or revised, which is usually 1, the title and topic, in our example, no one deserves to be abused, the intended audience, in our example, community members, and the number used, which is not printed but actually distributed. And then the final column is if this product was produced in another language, you would identify in that box which language that it was produced in, or you would leave it blank if it was not produced in another language. If you did not develop or revise a product in that period, but you did distribute it, fill out each column except the number developed or revised. Likewise, if you just developed a new product but have not distributed it yet, fill out everything except the number used or distributed column. Section D, Victim Services. Most of the data requested in the Victim Services section is congressionally mandated. Congress wants to know how many of the number of victim survivors seeking services were served and how many could not be served. Provide information in this section that represents only those victim survivors served and services provided with ALL program funding. When considering reporting a victim survivor on your progress reporting form, you must keep in mind 3 different questions. What services did the victim request or accept? The victim survivor has to request or accept services before you would count them in the victim services section. Next question, what services are you funded to provide under your ALL grant? Only report in the victim services section on grant-funded requested services you provide, not services you provide with other funding. The last question you must ask yourself is the person a primary victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation? A victim must be a primary victim of one of these to be served using grant funds and to be counted in the victim services section of your progress report. A note for elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation: if abuse is by an intimate partner, report in the elder abuse category only when you are not able to report in one of the previous categories of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Now, when considering whether to count the victim survivor as served, partially served, or not served, you are working off 3 different definitions. You would count the victim as served if they requested grant-funded services and your program was able to provide all of those services. You would count a victim as partially served if they requested grant-funded services, but because of programmatic issues such as those listed in question 27, which we will get to, but is called reasons not served, your program could not provide all the services requested. Count a victim not served if your program could not provide any of the grant-funded services that the victim requested due to programmatic issues such as those listed in question 27. Now, I'd just like to talk about partially served and not served victim survivors for a moment. We here at VAWA and the I often find that grantees are worried about reporting victims as partially served or not served because they fear that it will appear that they are not meeting their goals objectives or it will shed a negative light on their program. However, by reporting victims partially served or not served, grantees are helping OVW and decision and policymakers understand the scope and burden of violence that stretches far beyond what VAWA is able to fund. OVW knows that VAWA funding is not enough to support every victim who requests services from grantees. However, the only way they will know about it is if it is reported on your progress reporting forms. Therefore, we want to encourage you all to carefully track and report using both the quantitative data and narrative data to highlight instances of partial or non-service. Narrative data can highlight long waiting lists for services, full emergency shelters, or a program's inability to support victims on family court days. Your more detailed data can help show the great need for services that exist. Those seeking, a word on who is not counted at all. People seeking only services not funded with our ALL program grant would not be counted in the victim services section. People who did not accept any of the grant-funded services that were offered or recommended would not be counted in the victim services section. And any people who are not primary victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, or elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation would not be counted in the victim services section. Victims reported must be an unduplicated count and should only be counted once per reporting period. However, victim survivors can be counted in each reporting period that they are served. For example, if a victim requested and received financial counseling at the beginning of the January to June reporting period, then they also came back at the end of the reporting period and requested court accompaniment, which is promptly provided. They should be reported only once in question 26 and should be counted once under each service provided in question 30A. However, if they then returned in the July to December reporting period, you could count that person again on the July to December report. Victims need to be reported under their primary victimization in question 26, even if a victim has experienced more than one type of victimization. For example, a victim's estranged intimate partner, who had a history of very controlling behavior, is stalking her. She came to your agency looking for help with a protection order. You could report the victim under either domestic violence or stalking, but you must choose only one for question 26. The stalking category may be more appropriate because it was the stalking that prompted her to seek services. Now, we know there is a lot going on in the victim services section, so we're going to walk you through an example on our GMS form. A victim of financial exploitation by her granddaughter is referred to your agency. You provide victim advocacy and crisis intervention, both of which are funded under your ALL grant. So, here, we've reported one victim survivor under the category of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation. In this case, the victim received all services she requested that you are funded to provide under your grant. That is why this victim is reported as served in question 26. Additionally, on our example, a victim of domestic violence comes to your office and asks for group counseling, a service that is funded under your ALL grant. Your group is full and you place the person on a waiting list. She is still on the waiting list at the end of the reporting period. In this case, the victim did not receive the requested grant-funded service. That's why this victim is reported as not served under the DV/dating violence column in question 26. Then, in question 27, you would check off program reached capacity as the reason this person was not served. A woman who was being stalked by a former spouse came to your agency and requested transportation services. You are not funded by your ALL grant to provide these services, and you give her the number of a local agency who can provide transportation for her. You inform her of the services you do provide, but she is not interested. In this case, the victim should not be reported at all. The victim requested a service that was not funded by your ALL grant, and the form only captures data related to funded services. Before I move on to the narrative section, I would like to show you the demographics section, where you would fill out the demographics for the one victim survivor who was served in this current reporting period. Questions 28 and on to the rest of the victim services section only refer to victims, survivors who were served or partially served, which is why there's only one person listed in question 28 for demographics, and in question 29 for victim survivor's relationship to offender. This is where we are reporting the person who was served as a victim of elder abuse, neglect, or exploitation and their relationship to offender. Question 30A is where we report the services that person received as a 1 in crisis intervention and as 1 victim served, victim survivor advocacy further down the page. Now, the narrative section makes up the last set of questions on your ALL program. Narrative questions provide the opportunity to elaborate on the work you are doing with your ALL funds, as well as non-funded activities that are related to your overarching goals of this project. All grantees must fill out question 33 every time you report, and must fill out questions 34 and 35 annually on the January to June reporting form. Questions 36 and 37 are always optional. Please use question 37 to provide any additional information about the submitted data, such as if you submitted 2 different reports for the same period, or if you need to provide dummy data in a section in order to validate the form. We will be talking about validation. But question 37 is your opportunity to tell us if something that you entered on the form needs to be deleted to keep your report accurate, or If for some reason you are having trouble entering a particular number, you could describe what a number should be using the question and the number you want entered, the question number, in question 37. And when we receive the data to clean it, we would go and correct those questions that you advised us of in question 37. Once you have completed your entire progress reporting form, you must go to the last page of the form and click the Validate button. The validation process will highlight any missing or incomplete information and ask whether you wish to return to the section to review or change the data. When this happens, you may see one of two warning messages. One type is a validation error message with a red X. If you receive this type of message, it means you are missing some of the required information. If you want to fix this error now, you can click Yes, and it will bring you back to that exact question on the form. If not, you can click No and continue with validation. However, please note you will not be able to complete the validation process until you fix a validation error with a red X. The second type of warning is a reminder with a yellow exclamation point. This type of message indicates that something on the form looks like it may be incorrect. You do not have to make a correction to the form to successfully validate and submit your progress reporting form when you get this message. If you want to review the field, click Yes, and it will bring you back to that exact question on the form. If not, you can click No and continue with validation. However, we encourage you to look at these sections because often it is flagged an error that you can catch before you submit your form to GMS. After correcting or completing all missing information, return to the bottom of the form and press Validate until all sections of the form are complete. You will receive a third warning message, which is not a warning at all, but Validation Success. At this point, your form has been successfully validated and is ready for you to submit through GMS. Here, we have all three different types of messages that you can receive: the red X warning, the yellow exclamation point reminder, and this Validation Success message. So, in closing, we would like to remind you to please use Muskie's VAWA MEI website to help you with your progress report. Displayed is a list of all the products and information you can consistently find on our website. We also post important updates and notification letters from OVW regarding important requirements for new grant programs as the progress reporting forms become available for those programs, and updates on reporting provided by OVW. If you have any questions as you are filling out the reporting form, please feel free to call or email Muskie's VAWA MEI, your program specialist, or the grant management system. Here on the screen are displayed the main number to contact VAWA MEI, the phone number at OVW to reach your program specialist, and the OVW GMS support phone number. Thank you for joining us on this recording today, and we hope you find it useful. Have a great day.